The stars belonged to the Zephyrians. It owned them for 3,000 years, and no one in the galaxy dared to question this fact. Commander Vextel stood in his ship's control room, looking at the glowing map that showed all the worlds. Under his empire's rule, each green dot was a planet that bowed to Zephyrian power. Each red dot was a world that had tried to fight back and now existed only as space dust and sad stories. Vextal was 9 feet tall, covered in black armor-like skin that could stop most bullets. His claws were sharp enough to cut through steel, and his teeth could crush bone like a human would crack a nut. He came from Vex Prime, a world where acid rain fell from purple skies and the ground shook with volcanic eruptions every day. Only the strongest creatures survived there. The Zephyrians were the strongest of all. The galaxy had a natural order, and everyone knew their place in it. At the very top sat the Zephyrians, the ultimate hunters. Below them were the Korthok, warrior beings who had replaced half their bodies with metal and machines to make themselves better killers.
House.
Then came the Silthera, snake-like creatures, whose poison could kill even a Zephyrian if they were not careful. Dozens of other species filled the lower ranks, each one finding their spot in the great chain of predators. This system had worked perfectly for centuries. The strong ruled, the weak served, and peace was kept through fear and respect. No species had ever challenged this order and survived to tell about it, far away on the edge of the galaxy. On a small blue-green world called Kepler 44b, Jake Morrison was working in his garden. The morning sun felt warm on his back as he checked the tomato plants growing inside the big glass dome that protected his family's farm. Jake was 35 years old, with brown hair and hands that showed the hard work of farming. He had come to this world 10 years ago with his wife Lisa and hundreds of other humans who wanted to build a new life among the stars. Their settlement was called New Haven, and it was home to about 2,000 people. They had built it in a valley surrounded by rolling hills covered with purple grass that swayed in the alien wind. The colonists had worked hard to make this place feel like home. They built houses, schools, shops, and farms. Children played in the streets while their parents worked to build something better than what they had left behind on Earth. Jake wiped sweat from his forehead and looked up at the sky. 3 moons hung there like silver coins, and he still sometimes had trouble believing this was his home now. Earth had become too crowded, too polluted, too full of problems that seemed impossible to solve. When the chance came to join a colony ship and start over, Jake and Lisa had grabbed it with both hands. Lisa Morrison was in town that morning, attending a meeting at the community center. She was tall and slim with red hair that she kept tied back in a practical ponytail. Before coming to New Haven, she had been an engineer who designed parts for spacecraft. Now she served as one of the settlement's elected leaders, helping to make decisions about everything from water distribution to crop rotation. Her 8-year-old son Tommy was at school, learning about their new world alongside kids whose parents came from every continent on Earth. The morning was peaceful and ordinary until the sky began to change. Jake noticed it first as a shadow that seemed to grow larger and darker. He looked up and felt his blood turn cold. 5 massive shapes were descending through the atmosphere, bigger than any human ship he had ever seen. They were dark gray and shaped like giant arrowheads, with glowing blue lights along their sides. All across New Haven, people stopped what they were doing and stared at the sky. In the community center, Lisa felt her heart start beating faster. As the building's windows began to vibrate from some unseen force, she ran outside with the other town leaders and saw the alien ships settling down in the fields outside their settlement. The largest ship landed about a mile away from New Haven's main street. It was at least 500 feet long and seemed to be made of some dark metal that reflected no light. Steam hissed from vents along its sides, and a large ramp began to lower from its front section. Jake grabbed his communication device and called his wife. "Lisa, are you seeing this?" Her voice came back tight with worry. "I'm seeing it. Get Tommy from school and meet me at the community center. Stay calm, but hurry." All around the settlement, parents were doing the same thing. They gathered there. Children had moved toward the center of town, following the emergency plans they had practiced but never thought they would need to use. The colonists of New Haven were not soldiers, but they were not fools either. They knew that going into space meant eventually meeting others who might not be friendly. The alien ship's ramp touched the ground, and figures began to emerge. Even from a distance, Jake could see they were enormous. They walked on two legs like humans, but were much taller and broader. Their skin looked black and shiny, and they moved with the confident stride of creatures that had never known fear. Captain Morgoth led the group of 20 Zephyrian warriors across the purple grass toward New Haven. He was 8.5 feet tall, young for his species, with scars on his claws that told stories of many battles. This was his first command mission, and he expected it to be simple and quick. His orders were clear: evaluate the primitive creatures, determine their usefulness, and begin the process of bringing them into the Empire. As Morgoth walked, he studied the human settlement through his helmet's sensors. The buildings were small and seemed to be made of weak materials like wood and metal. He saw no defensive weapons, no military structures, no signs that these creatures understood the reality of galactic power. They would be easy to subdue, easier to control, and might provide decent labor for the Empire's mining operations. The humans gathered in their town center looked even more pathetic up close. They were tiny, barely reaching Morgoth's chest, with soft pink skin that showed no natural armor or protection. Their limbs were thin and weak-looking, with no visible claws or fangs. How had these creatures even survived long enough to build spacecraft and travel between stars? They seemed designed to be prey, not predators. Ben Parker stepped forward to meet the aliens. He was 50 years old, with gray hair and the straight posture of a man who had served in the military before becoming a farmer. His calm expression hid the racing thoughts of someone who was trying to figure out how to keep his people safe. Behind him stood Lisa Morrison, Dr. Amy Foster, who ran the settlement's medical clinic, and Carl Rodriguez, who had designed most of New Haven's electronic systems. Captain Morgoth activated his universal translator and spoke in the commanding tone that had brought 100 worlds to their knees. His words boomed across the quiet settlement like thunder. I am Captain Morgoth of the Zephyrian Empire. This world now belongs to us, as do all who live upon it. You will surrender your weapons, your ships, and your technology. You will submit to Imperial authority and accept relocation to facilities where you will serve the Empire's needs. Any resistance will result in your immediate destruction. The human leader looked up at him without fear, which surprised Morgoth. Most species showed proper terror when first meeting a Zephyrian warrior. This small creature's calm reaction was either very brave or very stupid. Ben Parker took a deep breath and gave the answer that would change everything. We appreciate you stopping by, Captain, but we're going to have to pass on your offer. This is our home, and we plan to keep it that way. Silence that followed was heavy with disbelief. In 3,000 years of galactic conquest, no species had ever simply said no to Zephyrian demands. Captain Morgoth's mandibles clicked together in what his people considered laughter. These soft little creatures clearly did not understand their situation. He would give them time to think about it, and when they realized the hopelessness of their position, they would beg to surrender. Then the galaxy's natural order would be restored once again. Captain Morgoth stood in the middle of New Haven's community center, his massive frame making the building look like a child's playhouse. The ceiling was barely high enough for him to stand straight, and his heavy footsteps had cracked some of the floor tiles when he entered. Around him, 20 human representatives sat at tables that seemed impossibly small compared to his size. The Zephyrian captain found this whole situation amusing. In his experience, primitive species usually fell to their knees and begged for mercy when they first saw Imperial warriors. Humans, however, sat calmly in their chairs and looked at him like they were discussing the weather. Either they were too stupid to understand their situation, or they had more courage than sense. Ben Parker sat directly across from Morgoth, his hands folded on the table in front of him. The former Marine had faced dangerous enemies before, but nothing quite like this. Still, He had learned long ago that showing fear only made bad situations worse. He studied the alien carefully, noting every detail that might be useful later. Lisa Morrison sat to Ben's right, her engineer's mind automatically analyzing everything she could see about the alien's equipment. The translator device on Morgeth's chest looked advanced but not magical. The armor covering his body appeared to be biological rather than manufactured. Most importantly, she could see that he breathed air just like humans did, which meant he had the same basic needs for survival. Dr. Amy Foster was taking notes in a small notebook, but she was not writing down the alien's words. Instead, she was recording everything she observed about his biology. How fast did he blink? How often did he breathe? Did his skin change color when he spoke? As the settlement's doctor, she knew that understanding an enemy's body was the first step to finding their weaknesses. Carl Rodriguez sat quietly in the back corner, but his eyes never stopped moving. The settlement's head engineer was studying every piece of technology the aliens had brought with them. Their weapons, their communication devices, their armor, even the small devices attached to their belts. Carl had spent years reverse engineering alien technology from crashed meteors and space debris. Now he was getting his first look at active, working examples. Captain Morgeth began to explain the terms of surrender, speaking slowly as if he were talking to children. The humans would be relocated to work camps on asteroid mining stations. They would surrender all their technology and weapons to Imperial forces. They would provide labor for the Empire's expansion projects until they proved their value as servants. Species shows promise, Morgeth said, his voice rumbling like distant thunder. You have achieved space travel without destroying yourselves, which puts you ahead of most primitives. If you cooperate fully, some of you may even be allowed to live on garden worlds rather than the mining stations. Ben Parker listened to every word without changing his expression. When the alien finished speaking, Ben leaned back in his chair and asked his first question. Captain, how many worlds has your empire conquered using these same terms? The question seemed to surprise Morgeth. Thousands. Why does this matter? Just curious about your success rate, Ben replied calmly. And how many of those species would you say are happy with the arrangement? Morgeth's mandibles clicked together in annoyance. Happiness is not relevant. Order and stability are what matter. The strong rule, the weak serve. This is the natural way of things. Lisa Morrison spoke up next. Your ships are impressive, Captain. How do they achieve faster than light travel? We're always interested in learning about new technology. The alien seemed pleased by her interest. Gravitational field manipulation. We compress space-time around our vessels to achieve speeds your primitive minds could not comprehend. Carl Rodriguez made a mental note of this information. Gravitational fields could be disrupted if you knew the right frequencies. He started thinking about the mining equipment in New Haven's industrial sector. Some of those machines generated powerful electromagnetic pulses for breaking up rock formations. Dr. Foster asked about Zephyrian biology, claiming she was curious about how different species adapted to space travel. Morgeth answered proudly, explaining how his people had evolved on a death world where only the strongest survived. He mentioned their enhanced nervous systems, their armor-like skin, their superior reflexes. Amy made more notes, hiding her excitement. The alien was giving her a complete breakdown of his species' physical capabilities and limitations. She now knew they had fast reflexes but relied heavily on their nervous systems for coordination. She also learned they came from a high-gravity world, which meant they might be uncomfortable in New Haven's lighter gravity. The negotiations continued for 3 hours. Captain Morgeth grew more impatient as time passed. These humans asked too many questions and seemed far too calm for creatures facing conquest. In his experience, primitives either surrendered immediately or started shooting. This middle ground of polite conversation was making him uncomfortable. Finally, Morgeth stood up to his full height and delivered his final ultimatum. I have been patient with your questions, but my patience has limits. You have 12 hours to gather your people and prepare for transport to the labor camps. Any resistance will result in the complete destruction of your settlement. Ben Parker also stood up, though he barely came up to the alien's chest. Captain, I appreciate you taking the time to explain your position, but I'm afraid we're going to have to decline your generous offer. This is our home now, and we're not planning to leave." The silence in the room was complete. Morgeth stared down at the small human who had just done something impossible. In 3,000 years of galactic conquest, no species had ever simply refused Zephyrian demands. They begged, they bargained, they threatened, but they never just said no. "You refuse." Morgeth's voice was filled with disbelief. "That's right," Ben replied steadily. "We refuse." The alien captain's claws extended from his fingers, scraping against the metal of his armor. "Then you have chosen extinction. My ships will begin orbital bombardment at dawn. Your settlement will be reduced to ash, and your species will serve as an example to others who might consider defying the Empire." Lisa Morrison stood up beside Ben. "That's your choice to make, Captain, but you should know that we won't go quietly." Dr. Foster closed her notebook and looked up at the towering alien. "You might want to reconsider. Humans can be very dangerous." When they're cornered, Carl Rodriguez said nothing. But he was already thinking about the emergency protocols he had built into New Haven's systems. Hidden weapons, concealed defenses, and communication networks that the aliens had no idea existed. Captain Morgeth turned and walked toward the door, his heavy footsteps echoing in the small building. Their warriors followed him, their weapons ready, but not yet drawn. As they reached the exit, Morgeth looked back at the humans one last time. "We'll give you that. We'll give you that. But courage without strength is merely another word for stupidity. Think carefully about your decision. At dawn, my ships will turn this valley into a crater." After the aliens left, the community center remained silent for several minutes. Finally, Ben Parker looked around at his fellow leaders and spoke quietly. "Well, that could have gone better." "Amy, what did you learn about our visitors?" Dr. Foster opened her notebook and began sharing her observations. "They're strong and fast, but they depend heavily on their nervous systems for coordination. They come from a high-gravity world, which means they might be slower here than they're used to. Most importantly, they breathe oxygen just like us, which means they have the same basic vulnerabilities." Lisa Morrison added her technical observations. "Their ships use gravitational field generators for propulsion and probably for defensive shields too. The technology is advanced but not magical. If we can disrupt those fields, we might be able to level the playing field." Carl Rodriguez finally spoke up. "I managed to place tracking devices on their shuttle while they were talking. Small ones, disguised as dirt and debris, will know exactly where their ships are and what they're doing." Ben Parker nodded grimly. "Good work, all of you. And we need to let everyone know what we're facing and start preparing our defenses. We've got 12 hours to get ready for war." Outside, Captain Morges's shuttle lifted off from New Haven's landing pad and flew back to the Zephyrian fleet. The alien captain was already planning the bombardment that would turn the human settlement into a smoking ruin. He had no idea that his ship was carrying small electronic devices that were broadcasting every detail of his fleet's position and capabilities to receivers hidden throughout New Haven. The humans had accepted his challenge. Tomorrow would prove whether courage could triumph over superior firepower. For the first time in galactic history, the outcome was not as certain as it seemed. The moment Captain Morges's shuttle disappeared into the night sky, New Haven transformed. What had looked like a peaceful farming settlement suddenly revealed its true nature. Ben Parker stood in the community center and activated emergency protocols that most of the colonists had hoped they would never need. Warning sirens began to sound across the valley. It was not the panicked wailing of people in terror, but the organized alarm of a community that had planned for this day. Families moved quickly but calmly to their assigned positions. Children were gathered into the underground shelters that had been disguised as storage basements. Adults reported 2 defensive positions that had been hidden beneath barns and workshops. Jake Morrison kissed his wife Lisa goodbye and headed toward the agricultural sector with a group of other farmers. But they were not going to tend crops. Instead, they began converting their farming equipment into weapons of war. The massive combine harvesters that cut grain could be modified to launch projectiles. The fertilizer spreaders could throw explosive charges across great distances. Even the irrigation pumps could be turned into powerful water cannons. Lisa Morrison ran to the settlement's communication center, which was hidden beneath the town library. She activated quantum-encrypted channels, that connected New Haven to every human settlement in the system. Her fingers flew across the control panels as she sent coded messages to colonies that had seemed isolated and defenseless just hours before. The first response came from Haven Valley, a farming community 200 miles north of New Haven. Colony leader Daniel Wright reported that his settlement had also received alien visitors. They were preparing their own defenses. Pleasant Ridge Colony confirmed the same situation. Orbital Station Gamma, which everyone thought was a simple mining platform, suddenly revealed itself as a military command center. Dr. Amy Foster worked frantically in her medical clinic, but she was not preparing to treat wounded. Instead, she was creating biological weapons based on the information she had gathered about Zephyrian physiology. The aliens had made a critical mistake when Captain Morgoth bragged about his species' enhanced nervous systems. Amy had realized that the same neural pathways that gave them superior reflexes could also be their greatest weakness. She mixed chemicals and programmed sonic generators with the precision of a surgeon. If her calculations were correct, she could create sound waves that would disrupt Zephyrian brain function without affecting humans. The frequency would have to be exact. But she had the data she needed from studying Morgoth's breathing patterns and muscle responses. Carl Rodriguez descended into the hidden levels beneath New Haven's industrial complex. What looked like simple workshops and storage areas from above concealed one of the most sophisticated electronics laboratories outside of Earth itself. Carl had spent years preparing for this moment, collecting and analyzing alien technology that has fallen to their world as meteorites and space debris. The tracking devices he had placed on the Zephyrion shuttle were already providing valuable intelligence. The alien fleet consisted of 12 ships arranged in a standard attack formation. Their shields operated on predictable gravitational frequencies. Most importantly, their communication systems used quantum entanglement networks that Carl had been studying for months, working through the night. Carl began the process of hacking into the Zephyrian fleet's computer systems. It was like trying to break into a locked room when you did not know what the lock looked like, but Carl had advantages the aliens did not suspect. Human computers thought differently than alien ones, using creative problem-solving methods that followed no predictable patterns. At the same time, Jake Morrison and his team were turning New Haven's farming infrastructure into a massive weapons platform. The grain silos became missile launchers, loaded with explosive charges wrapped in metal fragments. The automated harvesting machines were reprogrammed to target anything that moved above ground level. The underground irrigation system was converted into a network of tunnels that would allow defenders to move unseen across the entire settlement. Ben Parker coordinated everything from the command center hidden beneath the town hall. The walls around him were covered with screens showing defensive positions, weapon systems, and communication links to other colonies. This was not the hasty preparation of desperate people, but the careful activation of plans that had been years in the making. The truth about New Haven was finally revealed. The settlement had been established by former military personnel who knew that humanity's expansion into space would eventually attract dangerous attention. Every building had been designed with defense in mind. Every colonist had been chosen for skills that would be useful in combat. Every piece of equipment served dual purposes that the aliens had never suspected. As the hours passed, reports came in from across the star system. The mining platform Orbital Station Gamma deployed defensive satellites that had been disguised as asteroid processors. Haven Valley Colony revealed underground weapon factories that had been producing ammunition for months. Pleasant Ridge activated a communications array powerful enough to contact Earth. Request immediate military assistance. Dr. Foster completed her sonic weapon system as the first light of dawn appeared on the horizon. The device looked like a simple emergency broadcast transmitter, but it was actually a precisely tuned neural disruptor that could affect every Zephyrian within 50 miles. She had also prepared backup biological agents that could be delivered through the settlement's water supply or released into the atmosphere. Carl Rodriguez achieved his greatest breakthrough just as Captain Morgoth's fleet began moving into attack position. Using quantum hacking techniques that had never been attempted before, Carl penetrated the Zephyrian command network and gained access to their tactical systems. He could see their battle plans, their ship positions, and most importantly, their shield frequencies. Jake Morrison made final adjustments to the agricultural weapon systems as alien ships appeared in the morning sky. The converted farm equipment looked innocent enough from above, but Jake knew they packed enough firepower to surprise any enemy that underestimated human ingenuity. He thought about his son Tommy, safe in the underground shelters, and promised himself that the boy would grow up free on this world. Lisa Morrison established final communication links with human forces throughout the system. What had appeared to be isolated farming colonies were revealed as nodes in a sophisticated defense network. Mining ships became patrol boats, agricultural stations transformed into weapons platforms, and civilian volunteers turned into a coordinated military force. Ben Parker watched the alien fleet approach on his tactical screens and felt a grim satisfaction. Captain Morgith expected to find terrified farmers cowering in their homes. Instead, he would face a carefully planned ambush that used every advantage human creativity could provide. The Zephyrian ships moved into bombardment formation, their weapon systems powering up for what should have been a simple extermination operation. Captain Morgith stood on his flagship's bridge, confident that this would be over within minutes. The primitive humans had chosen death over slavery, and he would grant their wish. But as the alien fleet prepared to fire, Carl Rodriguez sent a single command through their hacked communication network. Suddenly, every human defensive system in the New Haven Valley came online simultaneously. Missile batteries emerged from hidden silos, energy weapons powered up from concealed positions, and the entire settlement revealed itself as an elaborate trap. The Battle of New Haven was about to begin. For the first time in 3,000 years, a Zephyrian fleet was facing an enemy that had been waiting for them. The humans had spent their 12 hours well, and they were ready to prove that intelligence and preparation could overcome any advantage that size and strength might provide. Captain Morgith realized too late that he was not attacking helpless farmers. He was walking into a carefully constructed killing field, designed by people who understood that survival sometimes required turning plowshares into swords. The galaxy was about to learn that humans could be very dangerous when they decided to fight back. The first shot of the Battle of New Haven came from orbit. Captain Morgith's flagship fired a plasma beam that was supposed to vaporize the human settlement's main street. Instead, the energy blast struck a shield generator that had been disguised as a water tower. The beam split into harmless light that scattered across the valley like fireworks. Morgith stared at his tactical display in confusion. His sensors showed that the primitive settlement below had just deflected, a weapon capable of melting through battleship armor. That was impossible. These creatures barely had space travel, and now they were using shield technology that his own engineers would be proud of. Ben Parker watched the alien attack from his command center and smiled grimly. The shield generators had been Carl Rodriguez's masterpiece, built from salvaged alien technology and powered by the settlement's geothermal plants. Now it was time to show their visitors what humans could do when they stopped pretending to be helpless farmers. All units, this is command. Execute Plan Alpha. Show them what we're really made of. Across New Haven Valley, the ground itself seemed to come alive. Missile launchers erupted from beneath fake barns, firing projectiles that Jake Morrison had personally designed and built. These were not simple explosives, but guided weapons that could track moving targets and adjust their course in flight. The first volley struck 3 Zephorian ships before their crews even realized they were under attack. Jake Morrison piloted his converted agricultural hauler toward the largest enemy ship. The vehicle looked like a simple farming truck, but Carl had modified its engine to provide enough thrust for atmospheric flight. The cargo bay was filled with explosives that Jake had mixed using fertilizer and fuel from the settlement's supplies. As Jake flew toward his target, he thought about his wife Lisa and his son Tommy. The boy was safe in the underground shelters, but Jake knew this battle would determine whether Tommy would grow up free or as a slave. That thought gave Jake the courage he needed as enemy weapons fired all around his small craft. Dr. Amy Foster activated her sonic weapon system from the medical center. The device looked harmless enough, but the sound waves it produced were precisely tuned to disrupt Zephyrian nervous systems. The effect was immediate and devastating. Alien crews across the fleet suddenly found themselves unable to coordinate their movements or think clearly. On Captain Morge's flagship, warriors stumbled and fell as the sonic attack scrambled their enhanced reflexes. The very biological advantages that made them superior fighters had become weaknesses that the humans were exploiting with scientific precision. Morgeth himself felt dizzy and confused. Unable to give clear orders to his crew, Carl Rodriguez worked frantically at his computer terminals, sending commands through the hacked alien communication network. He had complete access to their tactical systems now, and he was using that access to turn their own technology against them. Shield generators shut down at critical moments, weapon systems misfired, navigation computers sent ships spinning out of control. Lisa Morrison coordinated the defense from her position in the communications center. Through her screens, she could see the entire battle unfolding across the star system. Haven Valley Colony had revealed massive railguns that fired projectiles at incredible speeds. Pleasant Ridge was launching swarms of small fighter craft that had been disguised as agricultural drones. Orbital Station Gamma was using its industrial mining lasers to slice through enemy hull plating like butter. The Zephyrian fleet found itself fighting not just one settlement, but an entire network of hidden military installations. Had thought was a collection of defenseless farming colonies, turned out to be the most sophisticated defense system they had ever encountered. Jake. Morrison's hauler penetrated the flagship's defensive screen just as its shields failed under Carl's electronic assault. Jake flew his explosive laden vehicle directly into the ship's engine bay, transmitting his final message as he did so. "Tell Lisa I kept my promise about protecting our home." The explosion tore through the flagship's power core, sending cascades of energy throughout the massive vessel. Captain Morgeth watched in horror as his proud warship began breaking apart. Around him, in his final moments, he realized the terrible truth. These humans had been planning for this battle long before his fleet arrived. They had turned their entire star system into a trap, and his ships had flown directly into it. Dr. Foster's biological weapons began taking effect as her sonic disruptors continued to scramble alien nervous systems. She had also released airborne agents into the atmosphere above the battlefield. These microscopic weapons were designed to attack Zephyrian respiratory systems, making it difficult for the aliens to breathe in the planet's atmosphere. Carl Rodriguez achieved his greatest triumph when he gained control of the alien fleet's computer network completely. With a few keystrokes, he turned their own weapons against them. Energy cannons that had been firing at human positions suddenly swiveled around and began shooting at other Zephyrian ships. Navigation systems sent vessels crashing into each other. Communication arrays broadcast false orders that created chaos throughout the enemy formation. Ben Parker watched the battle turn in humanity's favor and allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The aliens had expected to find frightened primitives, but instead they had encountered warriors who combined advanced technology with the desperate courage of people fighting for their homes and families. The remaining Zephyrian ships tried to retreat, but they found their escape routes blocked by human forces that seemed to appear from nowhere. Mining vessels revealed hidden weapon systems. Agricultural stations launched fighter squadrons and defensive satellites that had been disguised as asteroids suddenly came online around the system's edge. Lisa Morrison received reports from across the battlefield as the alien fleet was systematically destroyed. Her engineering expertise had been crucial in coordinating the defense. But she knew the real victory belonged to ordinary people like her husband Jake, who had been willing to sacrifice everything for freedom. Captain Morgeth's flagship finally exploded in a ball of fire that lit up the entire valley. As pieces of the massive ship rained down on New Haven's fields, the remaining alien vessels found themselves facing impossible odds. Human weapons that should not have existed were tearing through their formations, while their own technology turned against them through Carl's electronic warfare. The last Zephyrian ship tried to send a distress signal back to the Empire, But Carl intercepted and modified the transmission. Instead of calling for help, the message now contained detailed information about human capabilities and a warning that would terrify every predator species in the galaxy. Dr. Foster monitored alien communication frequencies as the battle ended. She heard the final transmissions from Diane Zephyrian crews, and their words chilled her to the bone. They fight like us, but they think like prey. They turn our own strengths against us. They're not what they appear to be, as the sun set. Over New Haven Valley, the battle of Kepler 4 for to be was over. 12 Zephyrian warships lay in burning wreckage across the purple grass, destroyed by farmers and engineers who had refused to accept defeat. The impossible had happened. A primitive species had not only fought back against the galaxy's apex predators, but had won completely. Ben Parker stood in the ruins of his community center and looked up at the stars. The building had been damaged in the fighting, but the settlement had survived. More importantly, they had proven that humans would not go quietly into slavery. Word of this victory would spread throughout the galaxy, and other species would learn that the age of easy conquest was over. The aliens had thought they were apex predators. But they had been wrong. They had just met a species that could adapt, learn, and fight with a creativity that no amount of natural evolution could match. The galaxy was about to discover what humans were really capable of when they decided to stop being prey. 6 months after the Battle of New Haven, the galaxy looked very different. The news of humanity's impossible victory had spread through quantum communication networks faster than any ship could travel. On worlds across the Empire, species that had bowed to Zephyrian rule for thousands of years began to ask dangerous questions. If humans could destroy an entire battle fleet, what did that mean for the galaxy's established order? Admiral Lisa Morrison stood on the bridge of the battleship Freedom as it entered what used to be Zephyrian space. The massive warship had been built in the orbital shipyards around Mars, using technology that human engineers had reverse-engineered from captured alien vessels. But the Freedom was not just a copy of alien designs. It was something new, something that combined the best of human creativity with the advanced materials and power systems of a dozen different species. Lisa wore the dark blue uniform of the Human Defense Fleet, with silver stars on her collar. That marked her as the highest-ranking officer in humanity's military forces. She had come a long way from the farming colony where she had once worried about crop rotations and water distribution. Now she commanded a fleet of 50 warships that were on their way to deliver humanity's terms to the former rulers of the galaxy. The Freedom's crew was made up of colonists from across human space. Many of them were farmers, engineers, doctors, and teachers who had learned to become soldiers when their homes were threatened. They served alongside professional military personnel who had come from Earth when word of the alien invasion reached the homeworld. Together, they represented everything that made humanity dangerous to its enemies. Dr. Amy Foster worked in the ship's medical bay, but her duties had expanded far beyond treating injuries and illnesses. She now held the title of Chief of Xenobiological Warfare, and her research stations were located on every human world. Amy had weaponized her medical knowledge into tools that could disable entire alien species without harming humans. Her greatest achievement was a series of biological agents that were tailored to each species' unique weaknesses. The galaxy's former predator species had learned to fear Dr. Foster's work. The Korthok, with their cybernetic enhancements, found their metal implants turning against them when exposed to Amy's engineered viruses. The Silthera discovered that their deadly poison became useless when humans introduced compounds that neutralized their venom. Every species that had once seemed invincible now had to worry about invisible weapons that could strike without warning. Carl Rodriguez had become the director of human intelligence, and his network of surveillance devices had penetrated every major alien civilization. The former settlement engineer now controlled spy satellites, infiltration programs, and electronic warfare systems that spanned hundreds of star systems. His greatest success was the complete penetration of the Galactic communication network, which allowed humans to monitor every military transmission and diplomatic message in real time. From his command center on Luna Base, Carl could watch alien fleets moving through space, listen to their private conversations, and even access their personal files. The galaxy's former rulers found themselves living in a transparent world where humans could see everything they did. Privacy had become a luxury that only humanity enjoyed. Ben Parker had traded his role as a colony administrator for the position of Earth's first ambassador to the Galactic Council. The former Marine now represented humanity's interests in the political arena, where words could be just as deadly as weapons. Ben's job was to convince the galaxy's surviving leaders that cooperation was better than extinction. The Galactic Council met on the neutral world of Nexus Prime, a planet that had served as the center of interstellar diplomacy for over 1,000 years. The Great Assembly Hall had witnessed the rise and fall of many civilizations, but it had never seen anything like what was about to happen. Representatives from dozens of species gathered in the circular chamber, their seats arranged according to the old hierarchy that had placed the Zephyrians at the top, but the Zephyrian seats were empty now, and the species that had once competed for the right to sit closest to their former masters now faced a new reality. Ben Parker entered the assembly hall wearing a simple black suit that looked plain compared to the elaborate robes and armor worn by alien diplomats, carried no weapons, wore no symbols of rank, and seemed almost ordinary next to the towering figures around him. But every being in that chamber knew that this unremarkable human represented the most dangerous military force the galaxy had ever seen. The session began with a moment of silence for the Zephyrian Empire, which had ruled for 3,000 years, before being destroyed in a single day by creatures that most species had never heard of. Then Ben Parker stood up and delivered humanity's message to the assembled representatives. "We're here today because the old system failed," Ben said, his voice carrying clearly through the translation devices worn by every delegate. For thousands of years, this galaxy operated on the principle that might makes right. The strong ruled. The weak served, and everyone accepted their place in the hierarchy. That system produced nothing but fear, suffering, and endless war. The alien representatives listened in silence. Some of them remembered when their own species had been conquered by the Zephyrians. Others had built their power by serving the Empire and crushing weaker species. All of them understood that the humans were offering them a choice between cooperation and destruction. Ben continued his speech, outlining humanity's terms for galactic peace. There would be no more conquest, no more slavery, no more species being driven to extinction for the entertainment of their betters. Trade would replace tribute. Cooperation would replace domination. And every species would have the right to control their own destiny. "We're not asking you to like us," Ben said. "We're not asking you to trust us. We're simply telling you how things are going to work from now on. You can choose to be part of a galaxy where strength is used to protect rather than destroy, or you can choose to fight us and learn what happened to the Zephyrians." The response from the alien delegates was immediate and predictable. Some species accepted humanity's terms eagerly, grateful for the chance to escape the oppression they had endured for centuries. Others tried to negotiate, hoping to maintain some of their old privileges and power. Few made threats and promises of resistance. Ben listened to all of them with the patience of a man who held all the advantages. When the session ended, he had accomplished exactly what he came to do. The galaxy's former rulers now understood that they had two choices: accept the new order or face extinction. Admiral Lisa Morrison received Ben's report as the Freedom entered orbit around the former Zephyrian capital world. Below them, the planet that had once been the center of galactic power was now defended by human warships and governed by a council of liberated species. The great palaces where emperors had planned their conquests had been turned into schools and hospitals. Surface monuments to Zephyrian victories were being replaced with memorials to their victims. The gladiatorial arenas where conquered species had been forced to fight for entertainment were being converted into assembly halls where those same species could govern themselves. The age of apex predators was truly over. Dr. Foster's research had proven that evolution was not destiny. Intelligence and creativity could overcome any natural advantage. Carl's intelligence network had shown that information was more powerful than armor. Ben's diplomacy had demonstrated that words backed by strength could reshape entire civilizations. Lisa looked out at the stars and thought about her husband Jake, who had given his life to protect their small farming community. His sacrifice had led to something greater than anyone could have imagined. The galaxy that had once belonged to predators now belonged to the species that had learned to think like prey, but fight like warriors. The humans had done more than simply defeat their enemies. They had proven that the future belonged to those who could adapt, learn, and refuse to accept that anything was impossible. The age of humanity had begun, and the stars themselves bore witness to the rise of the galaxy's new apex species.